Have you ever wondered where chocolate and corn came from, or how long tattooing has been around, or even why the world was supposed to end in 2012? Well, believe it or not, all of these things are related, and I'm going to tell you about them today. My Spanish class on Latin America introduced me to the interesting and world of the Mayans. I've discovered so far through my class and my research that the Mayans were a very impressive culture. The history of the Mayans is actually very interesting, and some of the things that they did are very similar to the things that we do today. And today I'm going to share with you what I've learned about the history of the Mayans, in particular their society and everyday life, the symbolism of what they wore and how they looked, and their accomplishments, which were all very impressive from their time period and with the resources that they had. I'm going to begin with a description of their structure of society and everyday life. The structure of their society was a chiefdom, and the chief and his family were thought of the most godly figures on earth, and when they died, they would go where the gods went. And the different tribes fought among each other, and they would fight to conquer the other people's land, and then they would take the people that they've captured and use them as either slaves or, if they thought was necessary to please the gods, human sacrifices. The role of men were mostly farmers, except for when it came time to fight the other tribes, and they spent all their time working or fighting. And according to Latino America, Presente y Pasado, which is my Spanish textbook, the Mayans were the first civilization to produce corn and chocolate. AuthenticMaya.com explains that the farmers were very advanced and able to understand the statistics of farming. An example of this is that the farmers knew that the first year they used land, 100% of their crops would probably be able to flourish, but then the second year if they used the same land, only 60% would be able to flourish until they rotated the land. The role of the women was to care for the children and to weave and to create ceramics. And my professor, Dr. D. Ward, explained that all the men, women, and children were all work, no play. The only celebrations that they had were religious ceremonies. And as soon as the children were old enough to be helpful, they were expected to do so. The boys would go work with their fathers on the farm, and the girls would help out the mothers at home. So now I am going to tell you about the symbolic reasons of why they looked the way they looked. They looked and dressed the way they did for symbolic and practical reasons. They made deformations in their children's skulls, which may sound really strange and torturous, but people get plastic surgery today all the time to appear more beautiful, but beauty is relative, and this is seen even in our culture. Somebody who was maybe beautiful in the 1940s or 50s may not be at that same level of beauty today. So beauty is very relative to society. Some examples of the ways that they would deform their children's skulls would be to either flatten the forehead so that it lined up with the bridge of the nose, or to make the brain an oval-ish shape, so they kind of had a Squidward-y shaped head. And they would do this for religious reasons. They thought that that was very culturally acceptable. And my professor, Dr. D. Ward, showed me pictures in which you could see these skulls. They also had many tattoos and piercings, which, once again, this is something people still do today. However, today people get them in tattoo parlors, but they still do get them for very similar reasons. Either religious reasons, you see a lot of crosses, or symbolic reasons, something that they feel passionate about. And the Mayans wore little or no clothing, obviously for reasons of the heat and because it was not necessary at that time. And now that I've told you about their society and looks, I'm going to explain about their accomplishments as a civilization. They did not even have the wheel yet in Latin America, and they were able to create these impressive pyramids out of the resources in the land that they had around them, and some of them have still held up even to today, which shows how impressive and resourceful they were. They also created written hieroglyphics, which this written system actually included both meaning and grammar, which is different than the Egyptian hieroglyphics, which just had symbols that had meaning. The grammar was a different aspect. And as I discovered in PBS's Cracking the Maya Code video, we weren't even able to decipher this hieroglyphic system until David Stewart in 1987 discovered it, but he had been working on it since he was 8 years old. His father was an archaeologist, so he kind of followed in his father's footsteps, but he had been working on his own since he was 8 years old, I thought it was really cool. And the number system that they created was also very interesting. Our number system uses 10 as a base because we counted on our 10 fingers, but theirs was a 20 base because they use their fingers and their toes. And as our number system counts from left to right, theirs counts from bottom to top. And we have symbols for 0 through 9, but they only had symbols for 0, 1, and 5. And they would use these to create all their other numbers, which they were doing math to do so, but they were still able to use this number system as easily as we use ours. Another one of their major accomplishments was their 3 different calendars, which were for 3 different purposes. Their first calendar was a ritual calendar, which was based on a 52-year century, which is like our 100-year century, but the 52 was a very symbolic number. They had a lot of myths that surrounded that 52 years. And then they also had a calendar that started at 0, and 0 was supposed to be the first day, and then it counted up from there. And we have unlimited number slots, like the zeros place, the tens place, the hundreds place. They only went up to 5 slots, but theirs counted by 20, so it was a little different. They could go up to higher number of days. But this is where the Mayans' prediction of the end of the world came from. But as Kaylin Klingbeil explains in her article, the Mayan calendar is supposed to reset to 0 when the days run out. But what she thinks happened is somebody either read the hieroglyphics wrong or didn't realize that the calendar resets. And so when the calendar filled up in 2012, that was supposed to be the end of the world. But clearly that didn't happen. Their Solon calendar, according to the Latino America textbook, however, was astronomically correct, and they were actually only 13 days off our calendar year, 365 days. So that was actually really impressive for their time. They didn't have any of the instruments that we have. So in closing, throughout my class and research, I've discovered a lot about the Mayans that I would not have otherwise, and I've been able to relate them to our society today. And the classical Mayan period, which was the period when the Mayans flourished, which is what I've been talking about, produced an impressive and very interesting model for future cultures to grow out of and learn from. And whether or not the Mayans interest you, it's really hard to ignore the fact that we wouldn't be the same today without the Mayans. So I hope you appreciated and learned a little bit from this today.